All right, ladies and gentlemen, a very good afternoon. We've just gone 12:45, which is about the time we said we would kick off our virtual property event. Now, it's called the virtual property event because since COVID, we've been locked in a room, the four of us, once every 3 months, and going through this data and putting it online. But we wanted to get that human connection back. So today it's a bit of a hybrid. We'll be sending a video recording out. We'll sit on all of the portals and on the social media channels, but also we've got people here with us today, and wanted to thank all of you very sincerely for coming in here today. We know how busy everyone is. My name's Hazley Cush. I'm going to be your facilitator today and fellow panellist with Nerida Conisbee, our Chief Economist with the Ray White Group, Christine Rudolph, Senior Salesperson right across Brisbane, and Matt Lancashire, Principal Partner of Ray White Collective. And welcome along here today. We've got some amazing data. I can share with you that there's going to be some really strong information coming to you today. We're going to share information from right across Australia, which is fed from lots of different data sets, but largely as well from our group at Ray White, feeding directly from the front line. And then Christine and Matt, myself, we're going to get into a real micro look at what's happening in the market. We'll talk to you about open for inspection numbers, arrears at rental properties. And Christine and Matt are going to have a deep dive or a look at what's happening in the prestige market as well. All right, so I think we should get into it. Now, we're going to put you straight into the hot seat. Let's go through what's happening right across the country.
All right. Well, it is a very strong start to the year, so I guess that's probably the first point to make. Last year was strong in Brisbane. We saw over 9% price growth across Australia. Initial data is suggesting that that's continuing, and the big reason it's probably going to continue is that we are potentially in for rate cuts. So inflation is now starting to come down, which is really good news. It hit 4.1% for the December quarter. It is moving down quicker than expected. In the US, their Federal Reserve is now saying 3 rate cuts for this year. The market in Australia is saying 2 rate cuts. So potentially we'll be in for one in the first half, probably around May, and then potentially another one in the second half.
Because there is a lot of talk about this. I've heard, I don't know if you're economists at the bar, you've got your economists at the bar, you're all sitting around predicting on what's going to happen with rate cuts, but I have heard as high as 6 before the end of 25. Any feeling on that? What do you think?
Yeah, I don't know about 6. I think it is hard to predict that far out. But if we have a look at, one of the best measures is the ASX. People bet on interest rates. They don't bet, it's called interest rate futures. And based on those interest rate futures, they are expecting, or people are, the markets or business is really calculating at least 2 cuts. And I think we were talking a little bit before about fixed rates and term deposits, and you had some interesting data.
Yeah, I sort of look to what the messaging is from the banks, and the big things that we're picking up is, what are the banks trying to signal? And at the moment, fixed rates are lower than variable rates. Well, if a bank is lower with their fixed rate than their variable rate, then they're predicting that the variable rate's going to drop lower than that fixed rate. And the long-term term deposits, you want to get a 3-month term deposit at the moment, you'll actually get a higher interest rate than you will on a 12-month term deposit. And again, why is that? Well, they're wanting you to take the 3-month TD so that on the 12-month they'll be better off. So that signalling from the bank says that everyone thinks it's coming down, and we're feeling a bit of that optimism with buyers at the front doors.
Yeah, absolutely. The optimism is really apparent, particularly here in Queensland. Just having a look around the country as to what's been happening over last year. So prices increased by 9.4% across Australia. You can see there Southeast Queensland really doing well. So Sunshine Coast, Gold Coast, now more expensive than Melbourne. Brisbane prices continuing to move. So it is getting expensive here. It's moving a lot quicker than what we're seeing in Melbourne, for example, where that migration has really led to that situation occurring. But overall, it was a strong year, and a strong year particularly given that we saw the sharpest increase in interest rates ever recorded. So it was certainly not finance that was driving all this activity.
It's an interesting slide here. There was a lot of data. Our phone rang off the hook a couple of weeks ago from journos across the country, chasing information that said Brisbane has eclipsed Melbourne in terms of average price. Brisbane sitting at, I had it just higher than that, 877, and Melbourne sitting at 870. But what they did, and it's where you sort of good to look into the data is they moved the boundaries wider. They also reported that Melbourne had got bigger population than Sydney for the first time in 100 years, but they just moved the fence. And so I thought I'd do a bit of a dig, and you'll read it in the Sunday Mail this weekend, and you'll see that for Brisbane, if you want to find a property, if you look to find a property between 850 and 9, you will find there's 126 available properties between 850 and 9 in Greater Brisbane. If you want to go to Melbourne, in Greater Melbourne, and find a property between 850 and 9, there's about 25. I thought I'd check out Sydney. What do you get between 850 and 9 in Sydney? And you know, real estate, there's the icons, the bed, bath, car. I found one property and it was just a bath. No bed, no bath, no car, just a bath. So Brisbane's still very much looking like great value on the East Coast.
It is looking good value.
Just on that point as well, when you look at our 10% increase, do you believe that is also coming down to a supply and demand where we had a critical shortage of stock last year?
Yeah, absolutely. So if we have a look at some of the data points that we have here, just looking at pricing, you know, I mentioned before how fast it's grown here in Brisbane. We are now back well above peak where we were in 2022. So it has moved quickly. A big factor, of course, has been migration. So, sorry, this is really...
It's got you on the lag.
Yeah, it's got me on the lag. A big thing has been migration. So migration is, if you have a look here, migration has been really, really high across Australia. So you can see there the COVID period where we saw a loss of people to overseas, spike back up. But when you have a look at interstate migration for Queensland, this is international migration. So international migration is high, but really what is really high still is the level of interstate migration. So Queensland is attracting a lot of people, and it's been attracting a lot of people for a prolonged period. So if you have a look back to 20 to 22, Melbourne, a lot of people from Melbourne and Sydney moved up here. So Queensland kept growing through the pandemic, but then add in international migration and that continuation of interstate migration, you start to see the challenge that we have here in terms of housing supply.
While you go to that next slide, you can see there, if you look at it, 69% we're up year on year. So 23,000 people moved to Brisbane from overseas, or to Queensland, sorry, from overseas. Yeah. Victoria sat at about 50% year on year, and they had 33,000. So, you know, you're seeing that Brisbane really is, our numbers are growing in that space, but the actual number's still lower. Yes. The actual number's still lower. Internationally, but you'll show us now interstate. And that's going to come up here. And as I wait for that to jump across, you know, you'll see again the number that Brisbane is the only East Coast state, where we are positive year on year. And you can see it there on your screen, Nerida.
Yeah, so I think what's quite interesting, I mean, this is quite consistent. People come to Melbourne and Sydney first from overseas. They stay there a bit, don't like it, and then they move up north. So
we'll get you a Maroons jersey. We'll have you shouting out Queenslander next time you're up.
So the other thing, of course, has been housing supply. So if you have a look at the population growth that has occurred, it hasn't been the strongest of all states. So again, coming down to international migration, Sydney, Melbourne have grown quicker. But when we have a look at the number of homes built, it's a real problem here because last year we needed 55,000 new homes in Queensland and we built 32,000. So when we have a look at really what's driven pricing here, there's not enough homes for people to live in, and with that level of migration, it has caused a lot of problems.
Probably this is not a bad time to talk. I might get to it later, but we're seeing that's probably the big driver of the Brisbane market. Certainly is Queensland at the moment, just not enough properties. You can see it right across the country. Actually, I'll get to it a little bit later, but the information is quite damning on there's just not enough available properties for people, and that's even shrinking in the rental space. So people are transferring to purchase where they can, leaving less investment properties. But I think I'll tick to that and let you keep moving with your slides.
So in terms of the outlook, I guess, you know, a lot of what has driven pricing last year is the same. You know, we're still seeing a lot of people moving here. We're still seeing problems with the construction sector, and And that's, lots of problems there. Construction costs did increase very quickly during the pandemic. They increased more here than they did elsewhere. So we saw a 30% jump in construction costs. That's slowed down, but obviously it hasn't gone back, so it is still really, really expensive to build a home. But also it's just hard to find builders at the moment. So there has been a lot of builders that have gone under. Labour costs are really high here. We've got very strong construction unions, so that keeps the labour costs high. So it's going to be, it'll be some time before we sort out these construction issues and particularly try and sort out housing supply.
If you look at that as an on-the-ground issue as you dance to your next slide, I want you just to think about our storm season annually in Brisbane and consider it compounding this issue. So you get a storm season hits Brisbane with already not enough properties, and it comes through, it wipes out a property, right? So what happens is three negative effects. One is you lose that property from the market. You add another displaced person to the queue needing a property, and then you get tradies to come and fix the property when we already have a shortage of tradies. And it's this wheelhouse of issues that is compounding, which is now seeing, the positive is it's seeing a positive uplift for people who are selling. That's a negative when you jump to the other side of the fence and you look to buy.
Yeah. So I guess a big focus by government this year will be on, it has been for a little while now, but trying to get enough homes built. So the Housing Accord was announced last year. The aim is to build 1.2 million homes over 5 years. It'd be great if it happens. We've never built that many homes in 5 years. So I think the last time we did was last decade and we built 1.07. But if you think back then, there was this flood of money from China that was funding all that. So all those apartments that were built, a lot of them in Melbourne, won't get built in the same way because we can't get that foreign money back. So it's going to be really hard to try and hit those targets, but we will see a lot of new projects being announced, particularly around transit-oriented development. So anywhere there's a good train station or lots of retailing, we'll probably start to see more and more high densities being announced there. So I think planning will probably become a little bit less strict. One thing that's going to help this year is we are seeing more properties come to market. So last year was a challenge because we just didn't see many people deciding to sell. So people were really holding on to property. I think a lot of the uncertainty did create a lack of activity in terms of that. But it does seem that the market is freeing up a little bit now. So that's good news for buyers. It does give them more choice. Good news for sellers. We know most sellers are subsequent buyers as well. So, the more we start to see that turnover of stock, the better it is for people that are trying to act in this market.
Nerida, something that you mentioned before, and please forgive me if we're repeating ourselves here, but you mentioned in terms of the confidence that we're seeing as well, that open home numbers in Brisbane have really escalated this year.
Yeah, they're really high in Queensland. So they're sitting at 18.6 people per open home. We did joke earlier that some of Matt's properties are probably raising the average.
Skewing the data.
Skewing. I think one property we saw 254 buyers through, one inspection.
Unbelievable.
Which was, and I'll talk to that one in a minute.
How does that compare? 18 people per open. I mean, the second generation agent, I've been selling since the 90s. It was constant that you would go weeks without seeing some people during periods of time, especially in the 90s.
Didn't you learn to juggle at an open
I did, actually. I learned to juggle with the keys because I knew no one would interrupt me. Children stopped playing in the streets, birds stopped flying overhead. Nothing happened. But I'm interested to see, how does 18's a lot. Like, to give you 18 people on average per open house is extraordinarily high when you think many are going to go through a week with 1 to 3. So it's a really big number. How does it compare to other states? Is that?
Yeah, it's high. I mean, it's not the highest. I think Adelaide is actually higher at the moment. So Adelaide's a very strong market at the moment. I think we saw probably about 22 people per open home, but I think the lowest at the moment is New South Wales. I think that's sitting at about 8. So,
yeah.
It is very different across Australia. But here we're at at more than a 2-year high. So, it's a nice kind of real-time indicator for us to try and see what's happening, because obviously pricing we can get, but we need to wait for prices to come through. But open homes is really clear. I mean, the other thing that was interesting, that the average is really high in January, and January is usually quite a quiet month. So, it's showing that already, we're starting to see this momentum that we ended the year with starting up again. Yeah,
we'll give you some insight in a moment on that, what happened in January on the ground. which may have added to this increase. But just a big key takeaway early, 18 is massive. That is a really important KPI that we see. If you've got 18 people on average through the front door, average through the front door to open houses, that's massive. Yep, okay.
So rents are starting to slow, but it's been really, really tough for renters. So you can see that they were used to no rental increases as if you have a look at that time series from about for almost a decade in Brisbane, we actually saw a decline in rents in the unit in regional Queensland and pretty flat rents. So there was a 10-year time period where renters really just didn't see increases. So it was quite a shock to see those big jumps. I think what's interesting about the rental increases is that they actually started nationally during the pandemic, and so I think this is something that kind of really surprised us, because we were looking at population growth in Australia. It was really low. We're losing people to overseas, but at the same time rents were growing. And what does seem to be apparent now is that I don't know if I put this slide up. We did see a lot of people moving into single dwellings. So we did see this significant rise in the number of people living alone during the pandemic. We also saw a lot of share houses disband. So even people moving into, from two couples into one couple. So that was happening during the pandemic, and we saw average household size hit a record low during that time. So you can imagine, during the pandemic, we all spread out, and we were quite happy living in bigger homes, having a lot more space, and then suddenly migration came back.
There was an interesting item on the radio this morning, but it was talking about high-earning people that have rented in 2018 with 8% of the high-end people, and in 2021 it was 24%. How do you account for that?
For affordability, it would be. It is hard for people to get into the market now. And it's just becoming more and more difficult over time. I think, if you have a look at the ratio of incomes to house prices globally, Australia sits as the second least affordable country in the world after Hong Kong. So it does lead to more people renting, and also it leads to more people renting longer, and the generational gap between people, baby boomers versus Generation Z, I think is the latest. The number who rented at each age group, if you compare, is a lot higher. So it's why we've got a lot of policy now around trying to ensure renters are treated better, trying to work out, how do we keep rents affordable? There's a lot of discussion around negative gearing at the moment as to, is that the best approach? Also trying to, I think the big problem with people renting long term is that it's fine being a renter when you're earning an income, and if a high income, you probably get a better house. But when you hit retirement and your income goes to a fixed income and you're still renting, you're in a drastically different position to someone that owns property. So what we've found is that more people are in poverty once they hit retirement if they're a renter compared to someone that owns. So I think that's probably the real problem that we have when people hit that age group.
If you look at this rental growth over that last decade and you run just a standard trend line from where it was at 2014 to where it sits at 2024, it's actually more moderate. I know that's not that slide that's on, it's a previous one, but it's more moderate if you had consistent growth. As a property manager on the front line, in 2014 to 16, we were saying to landlords, you've got to reduce your rent. There's a whole building that's just become available, 100 properties, they're all the same. If you want to rent, they're offering free rent, free iPads, free holidays to get the tenants. If you want to compete, you've got to drop your rent. So we saw massive declines in rent. So that was really sharp. What we've seen in the last 2 years is really sharp increase. Government coming out saying only one increase a year. I'm not here to say whether that's right or wrong, but we were doing way more. Like sometimes we were doing decreases whenever we could to hold tenants because we were losing them. Now what we're seeing is a bit of a levelling. So it's really only supply demand, sub 750, that's really hurting the market. There's just not a lot available. I'll talk to that a little later in the micro view. Over 2,000, to your point, sir, is flying. There's actually, I did a search last week. There was only 5 properties across the city above 3,000 a week. By the end of the week, there was only 1 left. Like really strong, not a lot, not a big data set, but they're going. The 1,000 to 2,000 a week is actually, days on market's quite stretched. That's the softest part of the market. is sort of 800 to 2 grand a week. Is that days on market's dragging, so not a lot of available tenants. So low end and high end in the rentals, and you're going to hear from Christine and Matt later, low end and high end in the sales as well.
So I'll probably just finish off with there's lots of data here, but looking at, we have started to do a lot more localised data stories. So we will be pulling more of these out over the next 12 months, but really looking at things like expensive streets. We're starting to look a lot more around performance of properties over different price points. So recently we just did some work which I think is relevant to this market, looking at Brisbane luxury. That Brisbane luxury over the last decade has quite dramatically outperformed the rest of the market. And it's interesting, it's not just for houses but also units. We've actually seen luxury units outperform the rest of the market. So I might now, with that, throw it over to
Lead over to
Nerida.
Christine.
Christine.
So very interesting when you have a look at the prestige market overview. The previous slide, Nerida actually had that one of the most expensive streets in Queensland is actually Refinery Parade, which is in New Farm. And we've actually seen a tremendous increase in Refinery Parade. New Farm, it has beautiful riverfront apartments. Riverfront apartments continue to be the most in-demand apartments, and big one per floor apartments. And we do have some incredible case studies of the lower end of the markets, the units as well. But when we have a look at our riverfront at prestige unit stock, predominantly, as I said, the one per floor, we're now seeing that a lot of projects, as Nerida mentioned, are not coming out of the ground, and that means that the downsizers are actually paying a premium for beautiful completed stock that is actually in the market. We've seen some evidence of this in Kangaroo Point recently. Just since the beginning of the year, we've seen a couple of apartments which were completed pre-COVID. They've certainly had great price increases. They've been selling for 6.3, 6.2. Kangaroo Point, a lot of people who traditionally would have looked at suburbs like New Farm and Tenerife, which is the 4005 postcode, where they have had the most expensive prices, are now looking further afield and paying a premium. Another interesting sale that our office had there was 166 Oxlade Drive in New Farm. So that was a very interesting building. It was it's called Platinum on the River. It was actually built by Jimmy Raptors.
Yep.
Yeah, and that was a building that really got badly affected during the GFC. And Hayes, we had quite a few properties there going back probably only 6 or 7 years ago, where we were actually seeing clients who were taking losses still on their original off-the-plan purchase prices. This sale that was achieved there for 5.95 is a tremendous result for penthouses and exceeds the previous penthouse sale in the building by close to $2 million.
Yeah, I think that space, that prestige market again, really a lot of that unit market was affected, even though it was the low end where we saw the abundance of stock come in. It really has a ripple effect throughout the market. But Matt, there's been some big high square metre rates that we've seen a change. Do you know any of that?
Yeah,
data
there's
off your
been
head?
some, yeah, there has been. So it used to be, everyone used to chase the 20,000 per square metre.
Yeah, 10 then 20.
And 10, then 12, and everyone said 20. And some of the sales down along Moray Street at the moment have just transacted for 25,000 a square metre. For that, and it depends on how they work it out, whether it's internal or across the lot. But one of the highest sales achieved was 32,000 a metre for Brisbane. But if you go down to Sydney and you're in Double Bay, they're achieving in some properties 100,000 a square metre.
It might be worth talking about that sale because that actually occurred late last year. It's not on the list here, but it is an iconic, very tightly held building in Moray Street that is one per floor. And that building, was built how many years ago? That would be going back to about 2007, 2008. Latage.
Yeah, I think that was built early 2000s, maybe 2002, 2003.
And that price was in the
8 million.
8
Unrenovated.
Over 2 floors, needing renovation, 1 level and then rooftop balcony. Yeah, in a complex of 5, 1 per floors.
Yes. So just having a look past that, just a few little case studies that we've got here for you with the units looking onto our next
You got your clicker there.
our next slide. Sorry about this. This one here, as I mentioned, the refinery, just sort of going back one, the refinery in New Farm. This is the beautiful CSR building. It's a landmark building on Refinery Parade. That beautiful building there, we recently transacted a penthouse which was in original condition, and that property sold for 3.5 million. And that was quite an extraordinary result in that particular building, showing the demand for that postcode and that street. A couple of other little ones. Here's an example of a property that was brand new and bought off the plan just at the beginning of COVID. The developer was very uncertain at the time. Our clients just on-sold that property late last year and made a 70% uplift on what they bought that property for, which was an extraordinary result. And then we had another example, just going back. There was a property in West End as well, similar. Sorry, I'm losing control.
It will.
let you do.
It's that's your impatience on the lag. You're like,
Sorry
I'll just
about
keep
this.
pushing it and it'll go back.
I'll leave that with you. So another property as well, just to mention West End, there was a property, it was actually in a street that was flood affected. The developer at the beginning of COVID was really concerned about whether or not he'd be able to move his stock. We just sold a penthouse there as well. Again, 70% uplift on the original purchase price. This one here that we're referring to. But I'm just going to throw it back to Hazley because at the beginning of the year, we saw some extraordinary results with our unit market. So just to give you an example, first weekend in January, 8th of January is really when we have our first open homes. We had several properties that were going to auction. There was one in West End that we sold. First weekend, we had more than the 18 groups through that open. We couldn't believe it. We actually had 40 groups through this open. The identical apartment last year took 6 months to sell. We sold it in the first weekend with multiple offers prior to auction for a new building record. And then Hayes, all of the unit auction you saw in January was astonishing with the results that we achieved.
To give you that insight, that 18 that we were talking about earlier that I said I'd come back to, that number of 18 people on average coming through. So as an auctioneer, we used to get January off. We no longer get January off. And so came fresh back from Australia, salt still in the hair, well, on the forehead, used to be the hair. And we did a couple of auction events. Now these auction events, if you think about when they had to start before Christmas to gather the buyers to be called on like the 12th. We booked 6 auctions in on that day, all 6, 100% clearance on the day. Small data set at 6, but 6 and units to sell at that time of year when you think the market's probably normally gone to the coast is quite large. This one on the screen, these were some of the examples of the early sales. If you look at the uplift, sale price in 2020 was $645. It sold for $870 in Merthyr Road in 2023. Feedback through the campaign was sitting in the mid 700s. We did another one in Hazelwood Street at New Farm. This is in the lower end of the market as well. 3 offers, purchased for $385 in 2021. Sold in 23 for $535,000. So that uplift, that big uplift is not exclusive to the high end of the market. We are seeing it at the top and the tail of the market. Actually, Brandon Wortley, who's here today, our principal partner at Ray White Bulimba, was telling me he did an auction for a property in Newstead, which we launched, not Newstead, Norman Park, which we launched at the start of the year. Now, I remember, Matty, that's where we were selling those units in Norman Park and Norman Crescent 10, 15 years ago. We're lucky to get 2 or 3 groups through.
Very tough to sell.
We did this first week of January. Now, sorry to reach out. What was your number at the first open for inspection? 46 groups or people? Groups. So we're talking 90 people. So when he's pulled into Norman Crescent in the first week of January, he thought they were selling Taylor Swift tickets. Like he's thinking, what are these people all lined up for here in Norman Crescent? And it was to come to an open house of a 2-bedroom unit. First week of January. Normally, if someone comes through your open, you think they're lost, right? but not so far this year. So when you see numbers like averages of 18, it gives insight to what we're talking about in this top end of the market. I'm not going to give you the clicker back, but I'll move you to the next
Thank
slide.
you.
Your band. Talk us through these sales.
So this is the space where Matt has had some tremendous results here. This is the top 10 sales for Brisbane, and in line with exactly what Nerida has been saying, the prestige end of the market, Matt, is extraordinary. We've got a couple of your amazing results in here that I know you're going to talk about. The Greyer homes, just showing that people are going to pay a premium for incredible quality product.
The turnkey, absolutely. There is one sale missing off there. Was the house price record was broken this year for Amity, which is 101 Wellsby Street, which transacted for $20.5 million, which was a phenomenal sale for Brisbane. Obviously, it's the record, which is great. If we want to go to the second slide there, Hayes, we can talk about some of these sales and just to give you some clarity on it. So 25 Greys Road, that was a Greyer product. If you don't know who Greyer is, you're probably living under a rock or not on Instagram. Their marketing capabilities is just phenomenal. So that property there that sold for $10 million had 470 groups through the first open home. It was chaotic. It was a logistical nightmare for us. Obviously, not all of those were buyers, but we did have 5 written cash offers and selling for $10 million. They did their feasibility 2 years prior to that on that for what they were going to achieve, and they were doing their numbers on $7.5 to $8 million. And through the build process, obviously the build cost went up, but also the demand for that type of product also went up. Glencairn is another Greyer property, believe it or not, in Indooroopilly. It says 9 million, it was actually 9.25. So that's a record for that Indooroopilly market. Again, there was close to 300 groups through that property as well, and that was a phenomenal result. But if you look at a lot of these properties that have transacted there, the top end of town is really reacting well with auctions at the moment, where we're having on average any property over $5 million, we're having between 5 and 10 registered bidders on each property, which we haven't seen historically. A few factors are we last year across the board in the top end of town, we had a 50% chance of selling it to a local, either upgrading, downsizing, whatever they were doing, and 50% chance to selling to interstate, Sydney, Melbourne. Majority were from Melbourne and or expats coming home. We had our prestige auction event in November. I had 8 properties for sale in that event. We sold 7 under the hammer. But what was really interesting about those statistics, of the 7 we sold, 6 of them were locals. Only 1 of them was from interstate. So sort of bucked the trend a little bit.
Just also on that point, Matt, there was an extraordinary result that you achieved at those prestige auctions, and I think bucking the trend away from brand new completed products, we saw that beautiful property on Tenerife Drive. That was one of the most exciting auctions that I've seen last year.
Yeah, it was fun.
Because we had 2 local buyers fighting it out toe for toe to buy an unrenovated blue chip piece of land on Tenerife Drive. So talk us through a little bit about that and the demand for blue chip unrenovated.
Well, I don't know if they did their due diligence on what it cost to remove a house, because I got a quote for $500,000 just to remove it. But the build cost on it, it had Sean Lockyer architectural plans, which they had quoted in for a $9 million build. So it sold to a local that lived very close to the property. We ended up having 100 groups through that campaign. Highest offer going into it was 6.6. The owners set their expectation in line with the highest offers and sold for $7 million under the hammer.
Really does go to show when you think about 2 local people thumping it out. I had the joy of being the facilitator, the auctioneer out the front and watching it happen. You add the build cost to the $7 million purchase price, plus the stamp duty, plus maybe some joy, maybe some profit. And you're thinking 25. That's what they're thinking. Now, we've already just heard that the highest price in Brisbane was 20.5, and that's people that are looking at our market. Yes, they're local people, but they're probably leaving the state for business and seeing other marketplaces as well. And they're seeing something in our city, and they're saying, these 25s plus are going to come. So,
How do you account for the savvy of these giant numbers of groups going through each one of these properties? Is it the amount of money spent on advertising? Is it they're so all-knowing that they know the name of every property? What's the mentality?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So it's really hard to measure all the metrics of it when you're having that many people through. For example, the Greyer property, you get a lot of Greyer groupies that come through that want to come through and just look at the architecture, look at the paint colours. So it's actually becomes a little bit of a logistical nightmare for us at the end. So a lot of that is driven through Instagram and social media. So we're getting a lot of people off the back of that. But we have to then send text messages straight out saying, if you have an interest in this home, please give us a call with priority, because we endeavour to call everyone on a Saturday afternoon, and getting through 400 groups of buyers can be problematic. And then you end up spending an hour on the phone to someone that wants to know paint colours. So we send out an email to everyone saying, here's all the paint colours, here's the schedule of finishes. If you do want to buy the property, please write yes, and I'll call you with priority. And that process has worked for us 3 times. And that one at Glencairn Avenue, it was interesting. So we try to measure where people come from a lot, and sometimes it's hard to find. But the gentleman who bought that was 35 years old, paid 9.25 million. So we're finding a lot of people are younger that are purchasing these properties as well. I don't know whether it's companies that are being sold, whether they've inherited money. You know, I think it's hard to measure it, but we do all of our marketing focus is Courier Mail obviously brings a lot of people, social media brings a lot of people, our databases, email distributions, text messages and everything. So it's all a collective approach. We call it competition creating.
And do you find that there's a correlation between the amount the seller spends and the results?
I just think that the more competition you have, and yes, I think the bigger you go, the more people more exposure you get. One extra buyer, one extra offer, one extra registered bidder will create competition, which will get you a better result. Yeah.
We've watched it over the last, so 15 years ago, it was pretty much, or maybe 20, it was the signboard, the window card, remember, the sticker in the window, and maybe an ad in the local paper or the metropolitan paper. They're pretty much all you had. Today, the metrics are huge. Like, you think as a buyer right now, we're emailing you, we're text messaging you, you're seeing it on social, you're going to a number of web portals, Domain, real estate, our own websites. Also, the paper's still hyper relevant. We still get a big return from the Courier Mail. The cost of the Courier Mail today sits at about 1/10 of what it cost 20 years ago. It's 10% less. Realestate.com is about 500 or 5,000% more. It used to be $100, now it's $5,000, pretty much in rough numbers. So we're doing more to get them through. For that long answer to what Matt said, we're finding that buyers have choice, they have limited time, so the more you're in front of them, the more they'll narrow in on your property, more inspections, perception, more competition, better price.
But also with that, there's less. We're 30% down of new listings to market at the moment. So in that, particularly in the top end, so 5 million plus, there's not a lot of stock on the market, which creates, you know, and there's a lot of buyers. There's more. So I've got a property at the moment which I'm selling. It's probably good to go to that next slide. This beautiful home acreage property in Fig Tree Pocket on Jesmond Road. We've had over 150 groups through that property in the course of 3 weeks. It goes to auction on Saturday. But one of the things that's fascinated me is there's been a big broad spread of price point buyers on that. And so we've got, I reckon, more buyers, and this is I don't know what it will sell for, but we've got a lot of buyers that have got I've seen a record number of 5 million plus buyers than I've ever seen on any property. So, that's a really interesting thing. I haven't seen that for a long time. You look at Langside Road, which the EOI finishes on that one on Friday. That was the one we had 256 groups through the first inspection. We're currently negotiating with 3 offers on that at the moment. One of them is international and 2 of them are local, which is really good. And co-marketing this beautiful property at Virginia Avenue with Brendan Wortley, and that's going exceptionally well. It looks like we'll have that squared away. It closes on Monday. But more interest that we've had in the high end. The inquiry levels are just through the roof at the moment.
I just want to sort of take a step aside from the prestige market at the moment, because one thing that we've all been discussing, and I know Nerida and I were chatting about this as well, and Hazley has been written about this in your Sunday column in the Courier Mail. One of the sweet spots that we are seeing in the market at the moment as a great opportunity for buyers is that sub 5 million property that may not be completely finished. So there is great opportunity in the market at the moment for buyers that can look beyond the finished product and see, as Nerida said, the downturn that is coming in construction costs. So good time to buy that sort of stock.
Yeah, I think you've got the old expression for residential real estate is zig while they zag, right? So it's going to come back. We've got a shortage of property available. Why do we have some opens with 257? And you will still go to a property on Saturday and there'll be 2, 3, 0 on some properties. Same in the investment property, in the rental market. You go through the property with 600 people a week. My mum did an open for inspection to help us out the other day. We had 250 people turn up to a 1-bedroom unit and 99 applied. Like, it is scary for those people. How do we even choose? We can't read 99 applications and assess them all in the time it takes to rent it. It's really difficult, that space. But then you'll go through another open, $1,000 a week, and you might be the only one there. And what we're saying to buyers, or to people that are in the market watching it, is there is some soft parts, and that is the belly of the market. And especially where you've got to do work, land at the moment has been one of those things where if you can hold, you can land bank. You factor in maybe some rate drops are coming. It's not going to be forever. You might find some value. And to that point of where there's less competition is where you'll see better value. Now, I think my mid-slides, Joe, here may have jumped off. I'm not sure what happened with it, but I'll just go through this. I've got some slides in front of me. I want to share some stories from the front line. So I'm going to give you some of our collectives. So the Ray White Collective, we have Ray White New Farm, Ray White Clayfield, Ray White Toowong, and Ray White Bulimba. And we brand our rental properties up through Ray White Cush Partners. So Living Here Cush Partners, which is our rental brand. So that's where we get our data set from. It's about 160 people, 82 real estate agents across the inner city. We sell from modest entry level all the way through to the very top end of town. So year on year, and I don't have this here, it was there earlier, but the gremlins have got into the slideshow. It shows that open for inspection numbers are sitting at the 4-year high. I just couldn't see it there, Joe, no biggie. At a 4-year high in the bar. So in the quarter of October to December, it went 2020 was around here, 2021 dropped, 2022 dropped, 2023 same open for inspection numbers. Unconditional sales, so number of unconditional sales is actually at a 4-year high. So we saw 2020 build to 2021, 2023 dropped, 2022 dropped back, and then 2023 for the year, we are up on the 4-year trend line. So really quite strong when you look at that. Our average price, our median price is very mid-range, very level, and that's because the middle end of the market is sitting pretty flatline, top end dragging it up, bottom end flying, dragging it down, so it's holding average median price there. Just to give you some insight about some of the rental issue, you're gonna hear lots of talk about rental crisis, what's happening. This is not a political platform, but this is just something for everyone to understand. There's not enough properties. So while people are looking everywhere but more properties as the solution to this, they're looking at the wrong target. More properties is the target. Private landlords have the properties. They're either not renting them because the yields weren't there, or the compliance to get them to a standard is just too costly, or the cost, the tax, all the other things that are involved is leaving them keep their property out of the market. Just think about this. Robin McElwain from our Ray White Toowong business did the data for me. I wrote about it last week. 176 units sold in a 6-month period. 176 units sold July to December in Toowong, one suburb. Of the 176, 138 were rental properties. Okay, so 138 of the 176 units were rental properties. 20 of them sold to investors. 20 of them sold to investors. The other 118 have been removed from the rental pool, compounding the issue for tenants even more.
And that's one suburb.
That's one suburb. You add that across suburbs, you're losing 100 properties a suburb. And why is that? The first home buyers are buying them. They're paying more. Well, of course, the investor's going to say, hey, let's sell it. We've had cases of landlords incentivising many tenants to help them get out. Those tenants are taking that money and then getting into the market, and they're buying. So, we're seeing that ecosystem happen. But the quick solution, because you can't build them faster than you can incentivise private landlords to open their properties up and bring people in, that is the solution to this problem, because that 138 shrinking down to 20, 118 properties being removed is a big issue. In the rental space, to let you know, the sub 500 market used to be the data set we would talk to. there's very little sub 500 market anymore. Those $400 to $500 properties are now $550 to $700 a week. We've seen that move. It's probably where they needed to be because the market didn't move for a long time, but that's where they are. Available properties obviously is low in the market, so we're seeing not a lot of properties available. Arrears for investors, arrears at an all-time low. Tenants are paying their rent, right? Arrears are as low as I've ever seen. They're paying their rent, they're looking after their properties, they're staying in their properties, and we're seeing arrears low. And just to that point I said at the beginning, sub 750 really strong, over 2,000 a week, really strong. 800 to about 2,000, they're sitting there in the market.
Just a question, Hayes, about those stats of the Toowong purchases. Are we still seeing investors trying to get into the market because the yields are high, but they're just being, beaten by the owner-occupiers?
Such a good question, Christine. So investors are back. You talk to any of the loan brokers, our loan broker partner, Paul Hickson across Loan Market. I check his data for applications. So investors were out of the market, investors are back in the market. But think about the unit owner that had the investment property. It was flat level for a long time. They're now seeing capital growth. You buy these investment properties for the capital growth return. They've got their capital growth, they're removing it. But if you're a different lens, if you're an investor, you're looking at this unit going, you're not looking at it of what it was, what it is. You're looking at it for what it is. You go, that's the price. That's the return. Do I back in Brisbane for a good forward outlook? Well, you couldn't build this unit for the price I'm going to buy it for. They can't build any others to compete with it. It's getting a new casino, a couple of new bridges and an Olympic Games. Yeah, I back this city in and we're seeing investors very much. It's really strong back in the market. Will they beat the first home buyers? Not if the first home buyer's standing in a queue with 98 other people trying to rent a property. The bank of mum and dad or government schemes are coming to the party to help push them into the market. We've got a couple of minutes left, only one or two. I'm really grateful for your questions, sir. Does anybody else have any questions? Madam, yes?
Just interested about your 18 people on average. Sometimes we refer to people and sometimes we refer to
Groups.
Could you clarify which that is, please?
Yeah, that's people. Yes. Yeah.
So 9 groups, you'd say?
Probably.
Yeah. Good distinction. Yeah. Yeah. Not.
Yeah, I think that's an average for Queensland. So you have to think like it includes
Rural areas.
250, but it probably includes something in Port Douglas, or
Yeah.
not Port Douglas, Mount Isa, probably possibly getting 2.
Well, you think
So,
about who's more likely to be watching.
Yeah.
But, place that against Sydney with 8.
Yeah, and also the historic trend. So I think, we always have the same market in Australia, but if we have a look historically, it's back to COVID peak in terms of visitation.
I'm glad you asked because 9 sounds more correct. But when I'm looking at from our point of view, when I'm looking at our data set, 18 to be an average, if that was groups, because I was thinking groups, 36 people through every open seems enormous. I can cop 18, 9 groups. Really good question. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
Just got a question with regard to the methodology of selling recently. I'm not an expert like you guys, but there seems to be more of a private treaty style of maybe the upper end of the market rather than go to auction or just go to sale, so not even advertised.
Oh, do you mean off market, John?
Yeah, well.
Not being a...
So they just, they're off market, but is it private treaty? Is that what it's called?
So the 3 methods, and you tell me which one. Off market is it's not advertised anywhere and they're transacting. Private treaty with a price, or then auction. And we might say this expression of interest might fall into that auctioning expression of interest. Which one?
I think it's a private treaty. So, an owner might say, well, I want $5 million for that. Go to the private treaty, I don't want any advertising. Is there a trend towards that?
We're seeing a trend toward auction or EOI. When you see a market move to price, it might be if there's less appetite for the seller to transact in today's market. So most sellers, when the rubber really meets the road and they decide what they want, they almost all settle with best price. I'd like this price, but ultimately if I accept that the price on the table is best price in the market, I'll accept it. A speculator, which is usually very rare, most people think they're this one, but they're not, is no, I want a number. And that's where you see people move to a private treaty, more of a speculation. I don't care how long it takes, I'll sit there. What people do learn is time actually usually depreciates the value because buyers think, why is it still sitting here? But we haven't seen that. Usually it's either going to be speculator or, and this is a really internal language, it's residual. So it means it's been to auction, it didn't sell, it then converts to private treaty. Matty, you're probably involved in the space more than any. Are you seeing more people move to private treaty or auction?
A lot of those ones that I see, they do have extended days on market for private treaty generally because they are prepared to sit and wait. I'm finding it personally at the moment that most of my clients are going to auction or it's expression of interest with a close date just to force the timeline. But yeah, our auction stats this year to date, we're 24 from 26 under the hammer or sold prior to.
Yeah, either sold prior or under the hammer, which is unheard of, 24 out of 26. And I've got 20 on Saturday and 5 have sold, so 15 to call. Right. Yes, sir.
Yeah, just wouldn't mind getting a bit more specific on where, like we saw that, as you spoke about, the market actually started to decline for a period of time. We're talking about to identify January as just off the Richter scale. How much before that was early 23 quiet, then by mid-year it started to increase? Can you be more specific about when things certainly changed?
I think I can answer that question with the example of the unit in Highgate Hill, the identical apartment to that last year when the interest rates were going up was having, I didn't sell it, but my owners were watching it. It took 6 months to transact. And there was a sort of a little bit of uncertainty from buyers in the market. They were reluctant to make decisions because they felt that the interest rates would continue to rise. What I believe that we've seen in the market since the beginning of this year is buyers feeling this sense of relief and optimism that the interest rates have actually started to stabilise and in many cases come down. And that does appear to be driving buyers to make very confident decisions now, because a lot of them are concerned that if the rates continue to drop, then there may be even more competition from buyers to jump in and grab properties. So that would be an exact correlation between one property that took 6 months to sell last year. This property, we launched it on the 8th of March, which is traditionally a time when...
8th of Jan.
8th of Jan, I beg your pardon, thanks Hayes. When the market is still asleep, we had more than 40 people through that first open with multiple offers and it sold for a new building record. Does that sort of answer your
I
question?
might talk about actual turning point.
That's what I was asking.
Oh,
Yeah.
sorry,
So it was January last year, January
Yeah,
23.
that's right.
We saw prices start to move again. So interest rates started rising in May. We probably started to see the market turn in March 22 as people kind of realised that the low interest rate environment was over. Took down until the end of the year, and then by the start of last year it started to move. So it took everyone by surprise that, given that interest rates were, increases were far from over. But really, I think it really just showed the complexity of the market, that people kind of think interest rates, house prices, there's this one-to-one correlation. But you look at somewhere like Queensland and there was just this storm of events in terms of people moving here and construction costs and, just a real change in the state and also the city as well.
To add on, we thought July to December 22, we get the data lags because we sell at this date, settles this day. The rear vision mirror of July to December 22 was a bloodbath. We're like, we'd had 3 of the best years of real estate. And then we got to Christmas like, whoa, that was actually really bad. We didn't really realise because we'd had such a good time before then. It was terrible. Then we saw a build. January for Brisbane, I don't know why. We either go to the coast, get some sea air, we come back and decide we're buying this year or we're not buying this year. It seems to be the case. We decided January last year we were building and it was good. Now, you think it was still unstable interest rates, but very much housing supply demand out. Forward outlook amazingly strong, construction bad. We're now internally saying 2023 was good. It's looking like 2024 will be better. So we think if we were having this conversation in a year, we'd think it turned again in January, to back up Christine's point. Turned January 23, turned more 24. We did not predict this turn 24. Maybe Brandon Wortley and Christine did with launching these units very early in the year, but everybody else just thought we'd come back to work after Australia Day, but it pumped
that's normal.
out of the gates.
Yeah.
Does that answer it? Yeah, cool. Any other questions? We're at time. Look, I just want to say thanks, Matt, Christine. Amazing, really great share. Nerida's flown in for this today. It's really great data. It's a privilege to be able to sit on the panel with you and share it. We do this every 3 months. So you're all welcome to come. We'll send out the tapes. Thanks to those of you that are watching it online. My name's Hazley Cush, and from everyone at Ray White Collective and Living Here, thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time. Thank you. Good afternoon.
Thank you.